Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Your host, Golden Zulu. So today we have another interesting example under net present value calculation. So the question there reads to say a project requiring an initial outlay of 15,000 is guaranteed to produce a return of 20,000 in 3 years' time. Use the net present value together with the internal rate of return method to decide whether this investment is worthwhile if the prevailing rate is 5% compounded annually. Would your decision be affected if the interest rate were 12%? So here we first calculate the net present value. So we know to say for you to calculate the net present value for, in this case, this question is very simple. We will just go directly in having present value is equal to future value over 1 plus r to the power t. Well, remember, we are interested in converting the 15,000 to the present value. We know to say we have this, where the rate is 5%, which is 0.05 to the power. Remember, the start of everything in the business is a 0. Then we divide our 15,000 divided by 1.05 to the power 0, where you still have the same 15,000. So this 15,000 is what is referred to as the cash outflow. So this is the cash outflow of the business. Then we know to say it was required to generate an amount of 20,000, where we should also convert the 20,000 into the present value, where we have this as our formula here, where we know to say the future value is 20,000. So we change this. They have said in 3 years time, in not 4. There is a difference between in and 4 when we are dealing with the future net present value calculation. So take note, they have said in, so you just go direct. If they said 4, you would have replicated the 20,000 3 times, which means you would have had the first year, second year together with the third year. But in this case, you will only go directly in putting 3y because they used the in. So you convert 20,000 divided by 1.05 to the power 3. Then here you will have 17,276.8. So this is the cash inflow. Then if you want to determine the net present value, the net present value, you will determine it when you say inflow minus outflow. So sorry, not minus, so we'll just add the 2, where we know to say inflows here, there are 17,276.8 plus, remember this is negative, so we'll say negative 15,000, where when you add the 2, 17,276.8 minus 15,000, you will get your answer as 2,276.8. So this is the net present value. Then they want you to calculate the so if you use the net present value in determining if a project is worthwhile taking, we know to say if the net present value is greater than 0, then the project is worth taking. We know to say if the net present value is equal to 0, then we are at a break-even point where producer surplus and consumer surplus are the same. Then if your net present value is less than 0, then a project is not worth taking. So here the project is worth taking because the net present value is greater than 0. So we will now use the internal rate of return in determining if this project is worth taking or not. So for you to determine whether the project is worth taking or not using the internal rate of return, you need to estimate the other rate. But in this case, let's use 12% in estimating the internal rate of return to finding out if the project will be worth taking or not. So how do you do that? So the way we will do that here is we will estimate the other percentage. Remember we said if the rate we were given is small, and you will find that the internal rate or the net present value is positive, you will get a bigger rate so that you get the negative net present value. Then we use it for our IRR calculation. So what do we do in this case? So we use the same 12% we were given. Then remember, no matter what, the cash outflow will still be what? Negative 15. So this is the outflow that we have. Then from here now we will use the 12% in determining the present value calculation using now 12%. So we'll say present value calculation is equal to future value over 1 plus R to the power T, where you note to say the future value in this case is the 12,000 over 1 plus, where the R in this case is the 12%, which is 0.12. Then the time we are using is 3 years. So you know to say if you were to divide the 20,000 divided by 1.12 to the power 3, you will get your answer to be 14,235.6. So these are the inflows that we are having when we use 12%. So when you subtract the inflows with the outflows, you will get a negative amount. So you will say 14,235.6 minus the 15,000. You will get your answer to be negative 764.4. So we now know to say this is the net present value when we get what's this? When we get 12%. But remember the internal rate of return. The internal rate of return is equal to the net present value in 1 times R2 minus the net present value in 2 R1 over N1 minus N2. Where you know to say N1 is the amount that you got in the first calculation, and in this point the N1 that you are having is, so the net present value that you are having for the first one is this one, where we will replace directly here. So we have 2276.8, where we multiply it with the R2, in this case it is 12%, minus the N2, in this case is negative 764.4 times 5% over 276.8 minus 764.4. Then from here you can just punch directly on your calculator. So we will have something like 2276.8 multiplied by 12%, and you will get 273.2. Then negative times negative is positive. So 764.4 multiplied by 5%, you will get your answer to be 38.2 over, where we will now add these two. We not said negative times negative is positive. So 2276.8 plus 764.4, you will get your answer to be 3,441.2. Where you not say you can just go directly in adding this and you divide there. So 273.2 plus 38.2 divided by 3041.2, you will get your answer to be 0.102. You multiply this with 100 so that you can convert it to a percentage. So if you multiply this with 100, you will get your answer to be 10.2%. So when we use our IRR in terms of our calculation, the project will be worthy taking. Why? Because this percentage is bigger than the one we had, which is 5%. Then the question reads further to say, would your decision be affected if the interest were 12%? The decision, if it was 12%, will be affected. Why? Because the net present value you got when you used 12% was negative. And if it is negative, then the project is not worthy taking. Then again, when we go on IRR, if we are given a bigger percentage in estimating if the project is worth taking or not. Remember, our IRR we got was 10.2%. 2. So this is greater than this. So our project is not worth taking when we use 12%. Thank you, your host, Golden Zulu.